Hello and welcome, chess friends. I had a long game today, and this is a game about how that went. So, as you can see from the statistics, I was black and I had a really good accuracy, 96%, only one inaccuracy, although I think there were a bit more than that, in all honesty. But let's have a look at the game and see what really happened. Uh, the game was really defined ultimately by one critical tactical blunder. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the situation. But for now, just see that I really I don't know exactly what to do against this London system. So I just bowed out into my fianchetto castling setup and then decided to see what to do here. And honestly, I even right here I didn't quite know. Now the correct idea is c5. C5 is logical and it paves the way for a knight c6 logical development and all normal looking moves. And perhaps I should have done that, but for some reason I just thought it's a bit complicated and I don't quite understand it well enough. So I instead ducked out with something like a5. My thinking at the time was something along the lines of this type of setup. But honestly, it was just more like a waiting move, ultimately. Now he pressed forward with the knight, and I thought now is the right time to bring the bishop out. Earlier, I perhaps was less likely to do that just because, well, what do I do after knight comes here? Push him back here or whatever. I guess it's not a big deal either way, but it just felt like now it's a clear-cut opportunity to to move it over here. Not the best move. The best move was still c5, but anyway. Uh, and now once again, running kind of short on ideas. I don't want to play a shitty move like c6, and I wasn't brave enough to play c5, so I just continued on with the pawn push. It does something, right? And I was reasoning that the knight being here uh, merits an a pawn push so that he can't settle over here. Of course, the knight is looking to come here anyway, so maybe it doesn't really matter. But anywho, this is how it went. And now's when you play knight back to d7. And critical to note that it should be this knight that's going back rather than this knight going forward, which might seem natural or logical, but in these setups, it really tends to be this knight that you should push back. And I think, at least, the main reason for it is it gives you potential push for this f6 e5 pawn break. So we get here, and here I play the move I thought was a good move, but the computer doesn't like it. f6 is the move I played. I thought it takes away the outpost, and this diagonal is really not that vulnerable. This bishop could come back if needed, and currently at least this bishop can't come here, and the queen can't come here, so I'm fairly safe, I thought, on the diagonal. But anyway, the computer doesn't like f6 so much. The computer would prefer, again, that I would play c5, h3, and end up in a more blocked up kind of position. I don't know how to explain it, but a more cramping, solid, winning structure. But anyhow, we played f6 and we had a trade. And then he played c5. We just buffered it up, capture, capture, and now he's taken control of the open file. And white has a small edge here at this point in the game. And it's not easy to challenge it because the queen has eyes on this pawn. So I got the queen out here, tackling a weak pawn. So he defends it. And then I re-challenge the open file. And now at this point I was expecting to see rook trade, followed by another rook coming here and potentially another trade. And then it will become a kind of battle for this pawn, where the bishop might try to hone in on this pawn and some stuff like that, and this bishop has to find a way to defend it. That's what I was expecting the game to go. But it didn't go that way. Instead, we had this waiting move here. And now this is a critical juncture in the game, actually. What do you do in a situation like this? Pause and think what you would play in such a situation. I think rook c6 seems okay. It is a computer top recommended move, but knight f8 is what I ultimately went with, and that's also pretty decent, like pretty much up there on the top moves. And the reasoning behind this is simple. I wanted to make sure the bishop has enough eyes on critical squares. The knight in its previous position it really didn't have much scope. It can't come out to any of these squares, and it's not yet a good time to execute a pawn break here. It's just a bit too wobbly, too much vulnerabilities. So I thought knight f8 is the most efficient or effective way to play. And here's where I think my opponent made his first major error when he invited a queen trade. I think it was an anxious move. Anxious moves always cost you. Anxious trades often cost you. And after I traded the queens, I think black had a much simpler game here. There's less pressure on it. That queen, when I had it on b6, it was definitely a lot clumsier than it is now. I played this move bishop c2. I don't know if it's optimal, but it's not bad. And the idea is to be able to kind of like hold on to these pawns with this bishop here rather than from the back. I don't know if it's better or worse, but anyway, I thought it looked okay. And I think what it did do is it coaxed a mistake. This is an inaccuracy. Computer recommends that white plays bishop b5. Looks more active, taking more squares, and yeah, it's kind of a reasonable way to play it. Instead, he got a little bit irritated with it and played this knight move here, which was not optimal for him. And at this point in the game, black is now ahead in the position. And now he's obviously eyeing the square. So we wanted to pin the knight with this loose bishop here. Okay, so whenever you have loose pieces on the board, you've got to do something about it. You've got to do something about it, otherwise things can go wrong. And now our opponent played rook c3. And pause the video here and think about what would you play if you were black. What would you play if you were black here? You've got a loose piece and you've got a weird looking rook. Now his idea is obviously it's something to do with doubling the rooks, perhaps tossing the knight here and then doubling the rooks, something like this. He's imagining that the game is just going to go according to his dream plan. He's assuming that the structure of the game is fixed, that the pawns are the way they are, and that's how it's going to be. But it's a dynamic position, even though it doesn't look like it. It's a dynamic position, and that dynamicism is brought out with e5. A releasing the Kraken kind of a move that just opens up this bishop diagonal all of a sudden, and all of these motifs suddenly coming into play. He responds by capturing, but now we see it. There's just way too much pressure. If he moves the bishop away, pawn goes up, rook's under attack, rook goes somewhere, then you lose the knight, or if it doesn't, then you lose the bishop. All sorts of shit going on here. It's really messy. And under all this pressure, our opponent made a bigger mistake than he needed to. What he could have done was to sacrifice the exchange and get on with life from here. And there's plenty of chess to be played still. Of course, black is clearly ahead, but it's playable. However, instead, we had bishop g4, inviting a kind of like double-edged, double dynamic stuff. And here you have to calculate what's the best approach. One idea was rook back here to just keep things a bit solid. But the more I thought about it, capturing here made a lot of sense because we're exchanging a lot of pieces and overall things are favorable for me. So there's not a whole lot that can go wrong, really. Okay, trades off the bishop, finally gets the knight. And here I'm a piece up with a passed pawn. And critical move here to play was bishop c4, which forces that you would at least be able to trade pieces. And he defends it as he should. And here, rather than capturing it and going into this kind of line, I instead just move the rook back here. At this point, he resigned the game. Because now it's pretty much done. If he goes back here with the knight, we capture, he captures back, and the pawn comes forward, and it's queening no matter what. So at this point, he resigned the game, and that was the end of it. The main moral of this game, I hope, as a takeaway for you, is that sometimes the game looks like it's closed, the position looks closed, but it really isn't. And you have to keep that in mind. You have to remember the dynamicism of a game and how quickly a game can open up. You have to keep in mind your opponent's pawn break potential and take that into account during your move so that you don't fall into a tactic like rook c3. You're just jumping onto the diagonal inadvertently. What he should have done instead was rook c2, patching up the loose piece in the position. That's all for today. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye.